Good evening and welcome to St Paul's Church on the occasion of What Do Words Matter, a roundtable discussion organised by St Paul's Opera. I'm Jonathan Boardman, I'm the Vicar of St Paul's and an absolutely devoted opera lover. You'll read in the programme that I've done a bit of amateur doodling in opera, but actually I'm more interested in reading about it and thinking about it and occasionally writing about it. And so I'm delighted over the years that by chance I've made friends, and not because they were opera librettists, but because they were friends, with two very significant librettists who are here with me tonight, Meredith Oakes and Philip Hensher. And I'd really like you to thank them for joining us tonight in this rather niche operatic locale. But it may be niche, but it's also particularly effective and special. Remember that St Paul's Opera puts on operas to enable young singers who are training at operatic schools and at music colleges to encounter roles that they intend and hope to fill in professional contexts. Therefore, this St Paul's Opera, since 2013, has benefited from the engagement that young singers have given to a whole range of operatic performances. And the fact that we missed our Albert Herring production in 2020, in the year of lockdown and pandemic focus, was of course a great loss. But we are hoping to be back with Albert Herring next year, and therefore libretto in English for the first time is a major focus for what our St Paul's Opera is thinking about. Therefore, to have invited and to have the pleasure of welcoming two major English librettists for contemporary opera is highly significant. Prima la musica e dopo le parole o viceversa. First the music and then the words, or first the words and then the music? Which is it going to be? As Richard Strauss's final opera, Capriccio, has it, it's a dialogue. It's a punt out there to find out what the truth of the matter is. Of course, contextualized by a love story between a beautiful muse-like countess with a composer and a theatre writer. And we don't know even at the end of that show which is the first or which will win. We'll be looking at that question as the first part of our discussion. Then as we switch to librettos in English, our special topic, we'll be looking at settings of existing texts or adaptations of existing texts, and then move on to the background to the composition of new, original texts. And our final question will be to consider what it's like to work with the composer. If the composer happens to be your friend, or whether it's just somebody you admire and is a colleague, or who knows, like Gilbert and Sullivan, people who didn't really get on, but made a lot of money together. We're also very blessed tonight to be able to welcome singers who are involved with St Paul's Opera, who are going to punctuate our round table discussion with some musical numbers. And I'm very pleased to welcome as our first singer, Ed Kay, who's going to sing a piece from Purcell's King Arthur with the text by Dryden, the Song of the Cold Genius. Our musical numbers are going to be given as actual step-by-step way through English opera. So we're starting with the oldest from 1691, and we will then roll out the musical numbers according to the timeline. So let's welcome Ed to sing our first number from King Arthur. To also draw your attention that our accompanist this evening is Elspeth Wilkes, and we're really fortunate to playing on the piano at St Paul's, which is an instrument that needs a good deal of inventiveness to get working. So thank you, Elspeth, for your presence with us and the accompaniment of these excellent singers. So, Philip Hensher and Meredith Oakes, what triggers the composition of an opera in your assessment of what motivates a composer and a librettist?
It's a very tricky one. It's very, people always very kindly refer to me as a librettist, but I've only written one. It was a very long time ago, so I don't really feel it as a profession. But what I've done ever since is write novels. And it's very different writing a novel, which is that you can let the subject kind of creep up on you and kind of fend it off, and only when the subject has really got on top of you do you kind of give in and say, okay, I'll write the novel. The libretto can't be like that. You have to put it together like a kind of business proposal for an opera house, and if they don't understand it, then it won't get very far. So for that reason, most new operas are adaptations, because an opera house can understand that. They've got something to work on. I was really lucky in that the initial commission was from a very small theatre. This commission of an opera with Tom Ellis in 1995. We were both very young and very kind of silly young men, and the Almeida that commissioned it. They'd been commissioning 2 operas a year for the last kind of 10 years. None of them had ever been revived. They thought, we'll just kind of spend our arts council money on these productions. So anyway, we came to this subject, which was, Tom was commissioned. It had to be written in 18 months, which is not very long to write a 2-hour opera. He had to find a librettist, and I happened to be going out for drinks that night. I'd just written a novel, so it was basically you. And he said, what would you write an opera? What do you want to write an opera libretto about? And the conversation literally went like this. I said, I think we could write a fantastic opera about Ordnance Stravinsky writing the Rake's Progress. Thomas went, no. And you could write an opera about St. Simeon Stylites up a pillar in the desert. No. And I said, what about the Argyle divorce? He was like, yeah. And then after that, we went to the very conversation went on. We just kind of said all the ridiculous things you could do with this subject. And it wasn't a period. Operas since then have been very often written about contemporary subjects. But then it was still quite an unusual thing to do. Alice Goodman and John Adams had written Nixon in China in the 80s, about 10 years before, and that was really the first opera on contemporary subjects that made a big splash. So anyway, we went to the Almeida, and they said, what do you want to write an opera about? And I said, the Argyle divorce. And the guy running the Almeida had never heard of the Duchess of Argyle, had never heard of this kind of ancient scandal. And I was just sitting there going, Pope, it's the headless man, thing. And he was like, no. So finally, in exasperation, I said, look, what this opera is going to look like is going to look like scenes from the life of a medieval saint, but instead of miracles, there are going to be shopping expeditions. So he just looked at me like, I have no idea what that sentence even begins to mean. And in that way, in an exasperated way, I said, I really don't care whether you understand it or not, that's what we're going to write. And it was very rude of me. And we would never have got away with that if the commission had been any bigger, And certainly once, Powerhouse Face came out, and the first run was a kind of succeder scandal, and people were clubbing each other over the head with batons to get tickets for the first run. After that, English National Opera came up to us and said, well, we're going to commission you two to write this time, we're going to put together a committee and they're going to explain to you what will work on stage. So that never really happened. So the whole kind of process of thinking about that subject, I think that it was I don't have any insight into what it takes to think of a comic subject, in short, because, so unique.
Well, in a general way, you could say the trigger for an opera is it's got to be something that brings a lot of people together to watch it. It's a public event. Therefore, if people are going to take the trouble to come and watch it, there's a combination of reasons why they will, but one of the central things is it's going to be a subject that rings a bell with somebody. What's more, it's going to be a subject that has the possibility for big, dramatic kind of growth, something that you can make something out of. But actually, I was just thinking, listening to that, the Purcell, which is from King Arthur, which wasn't, it's kind of an opera, but it's got spoken stuff and music in it. It's a sort of, well, it's not a pageant either, but it's a big event with, multimedia event. But that song, in the form of it stands alone as a song. It's got this very recognisable strophic thing going on. But you would never actually have a standalone song that was so weird with that particular enunciation, which is all about cold genius. And it's that frozen thing. It belongs in a dramatic context, in other words. So it's a song like any other, except that it doesn't make a lot of sense except when you see it in as part of a story. Anyway.
And can I ask, Meredith, when you worked with Gerald Barry on I've written it down here.
The Triumph of Beauty and Deceit.
The Triumph of Beauty and Deceit, was your pitching that with him because the theatre which was going to put it on, it was TV originally, wasn't it? But was TV involved in helping decide what the subject would be?
Funnily enough, no. It was Channel 4 got the idea that it was going to commission some opera specifically for television, and they invited people. And Gerald Barry is an Irish composer of extraordinary vitality and madness, and very, very good. And he wanted to write an opera, but he hadn't had much of a chance to do it so far. And so he said, right, I and 700 other people are all going to apply to do one of these Channel 4 operas. What am I going to write an opera about? And he'd just been listening to, there's a Handel piece called The Triumph of Time and Truth, which is kind of about love looking at itself in a looking glass and time coming up and saying, you are going to get old, and it goes on from there. Anyway, Gerald likes Handel very much, and he liked this piece, but he immediately, being Gerald, thought, well, what if Time and Truth didn't triumph? What if Beauty and Deceit triumphed instead? And so I think I'd like to make an opera about that, because literally he got it off the back of a record sleeve, the sort of synopsis of what Handel's piece was about, and he just turned it upside down. And he didn't know who to get to write a libretto. And there was somebody that he approached who was a sort of fairly known playwright, and that guy offended him by wishing to meet him on a train instead of sitting down and having a proper talk with him. And Gerald knew me through somebody else, and he knew that I'd been trying to write a play or two, and I was a music critic, he knew I cared about music. So he asked my friend if I'd be interested, and then we met, and it turned out to be just the kind of thing I could do. And so that, there are very weird reasons why operas happen.
Thank you both for explaining those surprisingly hidden, but at the same time quite regular and humanly sort of making sense out of ordinary engagement of how it happens. So thank you for sharing that. Our second musical number now moves us forward through British operatic and oratorio delivery with Handel's engagement with English texts in the oratorio world that, as we all know, is becoming more and more now part of what we consider the operatic world. So we're going to hear Hugh Benson sing from Samson, written in 1743, the dramatic moment, Total Eclipse, and this is not of the heart, you understand.
Total eclipse, no sun, no moon, all dark, amidst the blaze of noon. Oh, glorious light, no cheering ray to glad my eyes with welcome day. Total eclipse. No sun, no moon, all dark, amidst the blaze of noon. Why thus deprived thy prime decree? Sun, moon, and stars are dark to me. Sun, moon, and stars, sun, moon, and stars are dark to me. Sun, moon, and stars, sun, moon, and stars
So now we come to consider texts which arise from existing dramatic pieces. And a question that has to be put out there: what works best? The setting of a text that already exists, or the taking of that text and adapting it, or changing it, or communicating it in a different way? And the way I'm going to kick this off is to ask Meredith about her adaptation of Shakespeare's play The Tempest for Thomas Addis's second opera. And I'll just remind Meredith, I don't know if she does remember, that when she was working on it, she and I got together in North Lazio for a meal with some friends of hers whom she introduced me to, because she was taking some time out to start work on that libretto, weren't you, Meredith? And for the holiday it was supposed to be, but you were working. And a memorable evening meal in Ortolano, I think, in northern Lazio, just on the border of Umbria. And I remember already asking you, what are you doing with Shakespeare's text? And you saying, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do with it. Would you like to tell us how you approached that and what you did?
I could take a very long time, but he'll stop me. But just to start with, I ought to say that very, very few operas start from anywhere except from some pre-existing thing. Because the value of recognition in terms of getting an opera started is very great. Usually the real impetus for an opera comes from the composer. The composer has recognized something that they respond to and it makes them want to write music. And so a text which has just got out of thin air is really, really rare in the world of opera. That said, to do The Tempest is quite frightening because it's not only a masterpiece, but it's also a masterpiece that a lot of people have tried to make operas out of, and they haven't really lasted at all. Anyway, Tom wanted to do that. It's funny. There was a previous idea for an opera that Tom Addis had based on a book, and he'd asked the writer of that book to make a text, and that hadn't worked out. And so then another subject had to be thought of. And then he wanted to do Serenading Angel, an opera that he subsequently did. And there was so many complications about acquiring the rights to it that that didn't happen. So by this time, there was a sort of sell-by date on the commission. The opera had to be done for Covent Garden. And Tom and I went away and wrote lists of things that we thought we might like to do an opera about. And The Tempest appeared on both people's lists. And I think it's something to do with the modernity of that story, which is full of magic and sort of set pieces of various kinds, but the playing with what is revenge, what is harm, what is healing, what is belief, and what is the damage that people can do to each other, and how does this fit in the world as a whole? I mean, The Tempest is a very modern play in that way, which is, that was something to do with why I thought it was a good idea. I don't know if it was the same with Tom. But the other thing about it is it's got lots of different rhythms, so there are fairy songs that are quite simple rhythms, and then there's lots that's in pentameters and so on. And lots of things that you can visualize on stage very easily because they're they're scary or they're magical or they have great emotional intensity. You know, it's got an awful lot going for it. But when I started to think about how to do it, it was obvious that it couldn't be the whole text, even if one wanted to do that, because there's just far too much of it. It was obvious to me that it couldn't stay true to the verse form, which is the dominant one in Shakespeare's play, which is the iambic pentameter, you know, the 5-beat lines. This is a great form for writing lute songs or something. A pentameter is not a het up kind of thing. It's a reflective. It turns in on itself. It's quite a complex rhythm in terms of the mood that it lives in. And for an opera, you can't just stay there. At least if you did stay there, you would have to be very, very bold with the music and run against the rhythms of the pentameters. I mean, which people have also done. I mean, Handel did it in his oratorio sometimes with his pentameter. But I thought, okay, so we can use pentameter a bit, but actually I need to find other things. And I thought, this is a monument, this play is a monument, and what we're doing is walking around it and responding to it. And we have to be bold and follow our own response and just find ways that you can make it into a sort of a lively dramatic experience. One of the first things that occurred to me was that Prospero's daughter is almost silent throughout the play. I mean, Miranda has a few things, and famous ones, but she doesn't have nearly enough stuff to be a major figure in an opera. And I thought, okay, well, this is where I'm going to start taking risk. I'm going to write what I think she says and what I think she thinks, and I'm going to do it in one of the things that Tom Ades wanted was to have proper arias. This is quite unusual these days. He wanted to have things that were more recitative, which is like the speech rhythm, and things that were actually proper songs with proper rhyme schemes and rhythm schemes and the whole thing. And I thought, well, I'm going to make a simple rhyme and simple rhythm for Miranda and do it, just get it out of myself, what she thinks about something. So I wrote this little thing for her and gave it to Tom, and he said, oh yes, do more of that. And so we sort of took it from there, but it did remain a walk around a monument. I can't think of a better way to express it than that, but a walk which is full of love, which is what animates it.
Well, the fact that we talked about it even before you'd written it, and then I remember going to the premiere at the Royal Opera House and staying the night at your house that night, and remembering how, often critics of modern operas don't rate the librettist very highly or won't put them up there when they're actually considering the way in which the music has worked. But actually your libretto got a great deal of critical acclaim, didn't it? Because I think people saw it as what you've just described, a true honouring of a monument that existed, but in a way that communicated it. And I remember thinking things like that, and I was so pleased to see the critical acclaim that you got, because I really
It's quite a relief.
You deserved it. Phil,
Not so much critical.
oh, well, I remember Rodney Mills writing about your text in Opera magazine.
Actually, the one that I really admire is Rupert Christensen, who was absolutely vile. I mean, Rupert, I don't mind saying this. Rupert, the first time it came out, he was absolutely scathing about the libretto. Terrible, appalling indignity. And
in your 20th century short story collection, you included the W.S. Gilbert story on which he based the libretto of The Sorcerer.
Yes.
That's the first short story that appears in that.
It is, yes.
And it's interesting that sometimes writers themselves adapted their pieces to fit opera. Well, here is another opera, an operetta of Gilbert and Sullivan, with a very striking number at the beginning of Act 2, when Private Willis stands outside the Houses of Parliament and considers politics. Here's Ed to sing "When all night long a chap remains on sentry go to chase monotony."
On sentry go to chase monotony, he exercises of his brains, that is, assuming that he's got any. Though never nurtured in the lap of luxury, yet I admonish you, I am an intellectual chap, and think of things that would astonish you. I often think it's comical, fa-la-la, fa-la-la, how nature always does contrive, fa-la-la-la, that every boy and every gal that's born into the world alive is either a little liberal or else a little conservative. Fa-la-la, fa-la-la, is either a little liberal or else a little conservative. Fa-la-la. When in that house MPs divide, if they've a brain and cerebellum too, they've got to leave that brain outside and vote just as their leaders tell them to. But then the prospect of a lot of dull MPs in close proximity, all thinking for themselves, is what no man can face with equanimity. Then let's rejoice with loud fa-la, fa-la-la, fa-la-la, that nature always does contrive, fa-la-la-la, that every boy and every gal that's born into the world alive is either a little liberal or else a little conservative. Fa-la-la, fa-la-la, is either a little liberal or else a little conservative.
Well, I suppose we'd say a little woke or a little unwoke now, wouldn't we? Rather than liberal or conservative. But anyway, moving on. Composition of new texts. As we opened this discussion, we talked about where does the story come from, but how does the text take shape? In poetry or prose, Meredith's already indicated a certain response to Shakespeare's rhythmical heritage, and then adapting it, or in fact putting new ideas forth, new rhythms. But I want to pick up with Phil about how he actually then, when the idea of the Argyll divorce and scandal came into his mind, how he actually made the text. I remember at the premiere at Cheltenham, never having heard the word rubberneck in my life. And when you had some characters called rubberneckers, I wondered, what on earth are they? They're the rubberneckers. So where did you get the text? And you've also said you didn't think you could exactly describe the perhaps most famous bit of the libretto in a church building where there are no words but just some gurgling and murmuring.
Yeah.
Some of you will know what I'm talking about.
I think I'm not a poet, I should say that. I'm definitely not a poet. I once won second prize in the Sheffield Star. I was 8 years old with a poem that began, "Gold is a flame flickering and dying." And I've never written a poem since. So I've not really, I wasn't really there to write poetry. Sorry.
It's just speak. Is it on? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. It wasn't really my. Okay. It wasn't really my job to write anything more than a kind of temptation for the composer. And I always think that composers, they're quite shy people, and you need to kind of lay out a little trail of bread that they're going to kind of take the little hint of the first piece of bread, and then they're going to follow it, and before they know what they've done, they've written a tune, you know. And I have to say that I saw the libretto that Tom asked the writer that he had to drop after wine, and I can totally understand why a composer couldn't do anything with it, because the musical effects of the poetry were so complete in itself. All it needed was somebody to beat a drum. Therefore, you couldn't write music to it. So what I did, I thought the thing that you have to do, the two things I thought you'd have to do, is have a succession of lines beginning in exactly the same way, with the same 2 or 3 words. And I think that's very tempting for a composer. Think of the Rosenkavalier trio, the climax, the building up to the climax when the marshman says, "Da steht der Bull und da stehe ich." That repetition is really going to draw the composer. He's going to have written the notes before he knows what he's done. The other thing that I thought you had to do is to have little phrases, 2 or 3 words, that the composer can tie to a musical phrase that they can go back to. Like in Falstaff, when "Da du Train" comes up over and over and over again, and Verdi knows exactly what to do. So there are all sorts of little phrases in the libretto that I wrote that are really thinking about the musical form on a small scale, about little kind of motifs, and song, a line of a song that comes back over and over again. But also there are kind of larger kind of musical forms, and the first scene begins with two people who work at the hotel, one of whom is impersonating the Duchess, and they run through her life story, and then she comes in, and it's the real character, and she does her real life story. And I said to Tom, what I want this to look like is like the exposition of the concerto, and the orchestra do the ritornello, and then the soloist comes in with the same material, and they do it. With that, it's very easy for a composer to work. So it's really kind of thinking about the musical effects of the prose, but not doing too much yourself, I think. The other thing that I really had to bear in mind was that you need about a fifth, as Meredith has said, the tempos, you need about 20% of the number of words in an opera libretto than you do in a play. If you read even a very, very verbose opera libretto like Rosenkavalier or Berg to Lulu, it's really, really savagely cut down. You don't need a lot of words, and so you need just to be kind of suggestive with your phrases. But it is a very kind of unusual task, I have to say.
So, if I can also ask Meredith just to comment, I remember in The Tempest, but maybe you talk about one of the other opera librettos you prepared, remembering how the close rhyming of some of the lines really took you along with it. I remember especially between Miranda and her lover, Ferdinand, a lot of their exchanges were in quite close rhyming, schemed kind of arrangements. In your other works, did you similarly write poetry, or did you just see how it took you? Were you looking to write poetry?
Well, I think if you want to write something that'll make an extended song, you are quite likely to wind up writing some kind of poetry because you need points where the meaning is very strong. I mean, one of the things that rhyme does is it lands at the end of the line and it focuses your attention on that particular idea. It does that in a way that normal speech doesn't. A song is not normal speech, you know. It's an essence of, and it. Well, I think we've been living through the 20th century. We lived through a period where the role of rhythm in music was rather underprized. Schoenberg, for instance, you know, when he invented the 12-tone system, he was basing it on the idea of the way your thoughts run and the way your sentences run when you're just talking. He was sort of thinking that anything else is not subtle, you know, it's just clunky. And people who admired the 12-tone system tended to take on, without even thinking about it, Schoenberg's rhythmic procedures as well. These rhythms are not very good for producing an aria, if you see what I mean. It's something that has its own shape and its own rules, that makes its own little world. And, you know, it's even if, just thinking of an example, now Handel, when he wrote operas, he actually wrote them all with Italian texts, and they were all very closely rhymed, and they're all, you know, short lines and so on. When he came to write oratorios, when he was writing the Messiah, the man who wrote the text was wanting to persuade Handel that he really ought to write this, and he made a collection of lines from the Bible. That's all that the text is, and they're all funny lengths, and none of them rhyme. So, you know, it's completely different from the song from Samson that we heard, which was, you know, a pretty standard little song. And anyway, Handel, because he was, maybe partly because he wasn't English, he just felt completely free in how he looked at this. The words weren't giving him these steady shapes, these symmetrical shapes, and these, you know, strong emphases and, you know, the other things that he wanted. So he just completely distorts the word. So if you think of he was despised and rejected, rejected of men. Well, the text doesn't actually repeat rejected of men, the text that he was given, a man of sorrows. But he totally denatures it in the music. He was despised, and then he repeats, despised and rejected. So he's making it into this, you know, the 4-beat rhythm that's really the heart of English song. And he goes on like that. Whatever he has to do to get it into parcels of 4 beats, he does it. Anyway, I've forgotten what I was talking about.
Well, you've told us revealed a lot. So, we're now moving towards hearing 2 pieces by the most famous 20th century composer in English, Benjamin Britten. And of course, this relates to St Paul's Opera's intention to deliver Albert Herring next year, as we plan to in 2020. And of course, it's interesting that Britain, as many people have written about, wasn't always the easiest person to work with, and indeed had a very long list of librettists, mainly not using the same one immediately following the first time he used them. However, I watched the Channel 4 programme about Britain on BBC, not Channel 4, BBC 4 on Sunday night, which was all, Humphrey Burton lauding Britain to the skies and saying how marvellous it was that he was on TV so much. But then they had Eric Crozier saying, not exactly easy to work with. We're going to be coming to that in our last real plumbing the knowledge of these two librettists when we talk about what it's like to work with the composer, and does friendship help, or is it just something that works and perhaps creates the genius. So we're going to hear two pieces from Midsummer Night's Dream, in which I used to think Britain was setting just bits of Shakespeare, but I realised when I was preparing for this, it was actually adapted Shakespeare. Quite a lot of it is changed, apparently between Britain and Pierce himself. But we're going to hear first there are two pieces that go almost together, but they're the two solo bits that are most well known to the soprano and mezzo-soprano roles of Hermia and Helena. So first we're going to hear Most Ungrateful Maid, sung by Davidona Pitta.
Tom was a great friend of mine, and he was a great friend of mine, and I think the really important thing for me was that we had a very similar frame of cultural references, so we didn't have to waste time saying to each other, oh, you know that bit in Henry Green's Loving, or you know that bit in the bit in Die Schweizer Frau or something. And it saved time, really, that you had the same references. And it's saved a lot of energy that we had, and we still have, quite a similar sense of humour, of the sense of the absolute ridiculousness. And I always remember going, after we'd kind of bashed out the subject of the libretto, going up to his flat in Belsize Park, where I was living there. He'd written a bit of one of the scenes and started to play on the piano, and it's an absolutely outrageous pastiche of middle period Verdi, just before the waiter arrives that she seduces. And he started playing this, and I always remember I just could not stop laughing. And after a bit, he couldn't stop laughing either, and we had to start seeing about 4 times. And I think that added a lot to the experience in the end, really. And I don't really know what it would be like to collaborate with someone and have to explain things to them. And it's not really in my way of working, really, to collaborate with large numbers of people, or to collaborate at all with people I don't deeply trust. Every so often, Tom and I have said to each other, "Oh, let's write another opera," and it's going to be, but it's always a bit of a joke. And actually, I don't know that it would be too too much of a risk, really, to write another opera with somebody who's just been a friend of mine for 30 years now. What would happen if we fell out irreparably? It would be awful. The number of opera librettists and composers that have really savagely fallen out, it's just shocking to me. We went to see The Mask of Orpheus, the great Burgess opera from 1986, when it revived for the first time in ENO. Somebody told me, I don't know whether this is true, that this was the first time that Burgess and Peter Zinoviev had been in the same room since 1986. The last time, I think the person was having me on, but he did say, the last time that they saw each other, Burgess chased him out of the house, then got in his car and tried to run him over. So that never really happens to me. I think actually it happened between Mozart and Da Ponte. Da Ponte wrote an autobiography late in life, immensely long, in which he doesn't mention Mozart at all. It's all falling out.
Well, that's good to hear that you're not worried that Tom hasn't asked you to write another libretto.
Nobody has.
Yeah, well, Pound of Her Face is still frequently performed. So when in 300 years somebody is considering 20th and 21st century opera, if there are still humans on this planet, you will be cited.
It's very sweet of you to say so, but I do know exactly what is going to happen to that opera. And it's what happened to Così fan tutte in the 19th century, that after about 1820, they could not bear that such a thing should be on the modern day stage. It might have this terrible effect on children, on religious belief, and it was wiped as well, until about 1930, when Kleinborn revived. And that is totally going to happen to Pound of Her Face. You wait until the woke generation come up and start programming. And then it will be discovered again in the 22nd century, so I'm not worried.
Well, I'm very keen to include the Fellatio aria in an We will get there one day. Meredith, you, I know, are the sort of person who makes friends with everybody you meet on the level of giving them calm and help and intellectual insight. Have you made friends with each of the composers you've worked with?
Well, talking bust-ups, Gerald and I only met, this is Gerald Barry, because he was looking for a librettist, but we got on very well. In fact, we got on extremely well, and we were close friends for more than 12 years or so, at which point I said something that caused the most terrific bust-up, and then there was sort of vitriol, coming through the telephone or whatever, and now we are very well behaved and we greet each other, and it's all right, but it's something about the twinness, that twin thing I can't remember how it said, we hate each other very much. We hate, if you've been very close to somebody, I guess it gets more explosive because you would like to see eye to eye about everything, and it matters more and more if you don't, and eventually, boom, that can happen.
A lot to do with Gerald as well.
Yes, it does happen a lot with Gerald, it has to be said. But Tom and I'm so much older than Tom is. It's sort of, I assumed that a sort of friendship in that way wasn't really possible. And also I live a completely different life. I'm buried in a suburb and, got children and grandchildren and stuff. And on the other hand, it's delightful. You have to be of one mind in a sort of a way. You have to understand what each other's doing. I mean, that experience of when the composer plays you something that they've written because, using your words, and you see what they've done with it, it's one of the greatest pleasures that life could bring you, but it also gives you a good idea how to go forward with the rest of the work, because you can see more what they want. So you've got to have, the idea of having a bad relationship with someone and continuing to work with them, you might do it. I did a lot of writing for money for years and years. I was a music critic for years and years. When I started writing plays and subsequently librettos and so on, I promised myself I'd never again write something I didn't want to write. And that would include, I would not want to be working with someone that I didn't get on with. That has never really arisen. There's a composer that I've written a short opera with that was done at Aldborough and in London. He's a Spanish composer called Francisco Coll. He's very, very good. But we are sort of, again, I'm much older, so we're sort of respectful friends, but we're friends. But there's a sort of woke incident. We were commissioned to write an opera, and he chose the subject La Dama Boba, which is a classic Spanish play. And La Dama Boba more or less translates as the stupid woman, and it's a story of two sisters, one who's very, very articulate and arty, and the other one is very, very stupid and even kind of refuses to learn to read. And then there are suitors for these sisters, and the one that was supposed to go with the smart, arty one decides to go with the stupid one because an uncle has been so sorry for her, he's left her his fortune. So the suitor gets together with the stupid woman who actually does love him, and through the love that she has, she becomes incredibly clever about concealing their relationship and eventually making it happen. So there's this sort of mad idea that love can make you more intelligent, but it's not that mad. We can recognise what that is. This subject, we've got quite a long way with. And then the people who were commissioning the opera, I didn't know how to translate La Dama Boba, but I decided in the end a good name for the opera would be Simple, which can mean simple in very, very many different senses. But they got more and more nervous, and they said, but you know, this is about somebody being stupid. You can't have an opera about somebody being stupid in this day and age. And we said, yes, but look, it's an idea of stupidity. It's not. It's a game, and it has an ending that shows that she's very, very far from stupid anyway. But they just got so scared that it wasn't able to go ahead. So that opera, which would have been very nice, didn't happen. And yet we are moving into an era where all kinds of things, all kinds of frankness is not allowed in terms of this might injure this person or this might injure. But the more you get scared of injuring people by being frank, the worse everything gets, the more closed up and tight and fearful everybody gets. So, you know, I think this is not a very good period in that way anyway.
Thank you. We're now going to hear the last of our musical items and hear the friendship between Hermia that we heard described in that first piece from Midsummer Night's Dream by Britten gets a comic but again vitriolic edge as Helena responds from Alexandra Dinwiddie.
Puppet, why so? Aye, that way goes the game. Now I perceive that she hath made compare between our statures. She hath urged her height. She hath urged her height. And with her personage, her tall personage, her height forsooth, she hath prevailed with him. And are you grown so high in his esteem? Because I am so dwarfish and so low. How low am I? Thou painted people speak. How low am I? I am not yet so low, but that my nails can't reach unto thy eyes.
Well, it's so nice to remember that friendship blossoms at the end of that play and that opera as the couples find the right pairings. Well, here we are. Thank you all so much for coming, and would anybody in the audience like to ask a question of our excellent librettists? Can I bring the microphone?
In Aldeburgh and the Red House, they have the rehearsal scores for Benjamin Britten's operas, and it's very striking that the singers, particularly Piers, would change words in the libretti because the original ones would not suit him, or there were musical factors he couldn't cope with. My question is, what happens to your words when they go into performance? Do people change them? Are you consulted about it, or have you found that people just sing them as you provided?
I'd like to see them try. Maybe I was very lucky that the question didn't arise, that they did what they were told.
Rehearsing with singers is not the same as rehearsing with actors. Actors, they use their memory differently, and they don't have as much to remember. I mean, singers are learning the music and the words, and you know, the everything. If there were too many changes being made, they just wouldn't, the task would be too much. So nobody really, once it got to the point of being rehearsed, nobody really wants to make changes. There would have to be something really drastic. There's a pussycat. And also, usually, the words have been set by the composer in a particular way, so it's not so easy to mess around with it as it is with the spoken word. I've not known any singer change a word in rehearsal. No, I mean if they said I simply cannot sing that high note on that vowel, then you might be really worried. But you kind of hope that the composer has taken that into account before they start. And there might be more than one way to fix it. If they hadn't, you'd either change the word or change the note. But anyway, it's pretty rare. Much of the same tone. And I think if you spent 2.5 hours with it, you might get something. But if it was a long one-act opera, it could be stunning.
I think the other challenge, I know I'm not supposed to speak to you, the other challenge with it that would make it quite unusual is that for most of it, the 4 characters are all on stage. And it doesn't have, most operas that work, the Exterminating Angel is a very unusual example in that all the characters are on stage at the same time, all the way through. But most operas, people come and go. The soprano gets to go off stage and gargle, they're not, it makes for 2 reasons. One is that it's dramatic. You want a lot more variation in tone in an opera, I think, than in a spoken play. The other point is just the practical thing of organising the rehearsals. Because if every member of the cast has to be at every rehearsal, that's a big kind of commitment. So I think the problem would arise. But on the other hand, it's a change of pieces, 4 singers. It could just be done. It's not like I think there would be some problems to overcome that.
Coco walked through but didn't ask twice. Questions would be in the hour.
This is a question. First of all, thank you both. This has been fascinating hearing you speak. And this is a question for both of you. We can take it whichever one you prefer. At what point in your life or your career did you both discover or decide you wanted to become a writer, an apprentice?
No, I didn't at all. I always, ever since I was quite little, I was interested. I didn't like writing poetry as such because there was something too much like I am taking the floor about writing poetry. But I was always interested in rhyme schemes, writing things that you could make shapes out of with words. So that's a game I used to play, and I did that all through my teens and what have you. I always knew I wanted to write something, And to earn a living, I started writing for a newspaper, and then, I got inundated in just working and staying alive and so on. And when my children got big enough, I thought, well, I would really like to write plays. Plays are something where you don't have to speak with your own voice. You can make a puppet show with all sorts of other people, and that suits me. And so I started to do that, and because I was doing that, and because I already had these contacts with a lot of musicians, I'd studied music at university as well. I played the violin, and I was very, very keen on it. It was only when I figured out you can't really be a violinist and a writer that I thought, no, I'd rather be a writer. But I'm not much of a writer anyway. But I did sort of have these contacts, and it was known that I was there, and I was doing this writing, and so that first thing with Gerald happened, and as a result of that, other things have happened since.
Yeah, I'm with Meredith. It wasn't an ambition of mine, and it's, one of the appealing and enjoyable things about it was that it's so unlike writing a novel, which is what I always wanted to do, what I've always done. Writing a novel is like it's like working in animations. You get up in the morning and then you kind of write 600 words, and at the end of it, you've moved his little plasticine foot a little bit further. It's a kind of minute accumulation of details. You do that for a year and a half, and you've got a 400-page novel. A libretto is not like that. It's much more kind of just a brilliant spurt of energy, and it's something that my memory is that I can't really remember, but my sense of it is that I wrote it very quickly. The sort of burst of inspiration that you only really get when you're in your 20s. So it was never really an ambition of mine. It was just something that came along, and I did it, and I was very happy to do it, and I never really expected to write another one. I never have written another one. The operatic ambition, I had two operatic ambitions when I was a boy and a teenager. One of them, weirdly, and I still think I would have loved to have done this, I would have loved to have been a repetiteur in rehearsals. I would have loved to have sat at the piano, and Montserrat Caballé came in, and I kind of lit my cigarette, and act three, and I just kind of hammered through a Lulu, and then I'd go off for that. I would love to have done that. It would have really appealed something. The other thing that I would, of course, have loved to have been, I would love to have been the marshal in Act 3 of Law. But I'm afraid that's never going to happen.
Well, thank you both very much. I really am immensely grateful for you both agreeing without being pushed in any way to come along this evening. I thought, it wouldn't necessarily appeal to you that much when I suggested it, but I do think, as our last questioner said, it's been fascinating to hear you share insights, experiences, and techniques in how you came to deliver what will be very treasured librettos in the future. So I'd like to ask the audience to thank you now, and then ask Tricia Ninian, the director and organiser of St Paul's Opera, to come and speak as well.
Well, thank you first of all to our very inspiring speakers, Meredith and Philip. Thank you very much for coming this evening. And thank you also to Jonathan for putting this all together and having the inspiration in the first place. I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for coming this evening. And we can't do these things without you. So thank you very much for being here with us. And of course, I'd like to thank our musicians this evening. And our dear friends. just to name them in person, and starting with the most important, not speaking from any personal experience or anything, but our soprano, Dave Pittock. Would you like to stand up, Dave, and say? And Alex Dinwiddie. Our tenor, Hugh Benson. And last but not least, the vocalist, Ed Kay. Applause to Elspeth, who's hot-footed here. Thank you very much. I also want to share with you this evening something really special, and alluding to what Jonathan was saying right at the beginning of the evening, St Paul's Opera is all about encouraging new singers and new singers to the game, people just embarking on their career. And I really want to tell you about something very exciting for somebody who's very new to St Paul's Opera as well. Joining us for Janis Kiki coming up very shortly. Hector Bloggs disappeared off on Saturday night, clutching his tablet that he picked up from my house. And he said, "Oh, I've got to dash off. I'm singing in a competition tomorrow." And you know what? He bloody well won it. So please, Hector, stand up and let's everybody give you a round. So that was the Courtney Kenny Award from the Association of English Singers and Speakers. So how appropriate is that for this evening? I would like to also just give you a few parish notices. We've got a few things coming up and I really want to draw your attention to them. They are on the programme, but it has to be said that we really want to see you here in 3 weeks' time for our production of Janis Kiki. It's going to be in the grounds of the church in the lower churchyard, and that's the first time we've put on an opera outside for obvious reasons, but it is the most amazing amphitheatre, if you like, and gives us a perfect stage, so do come along to that. Very shortly after that, on the 17th of July, Ed Kay is putting together a singer's workshop to study Verdi's Nabucco, which is probably one of the pieces that singers rarely get to look at in this sort of repertoire. So do come along and listen to that. It's free for the audience to come and listen to, 17th of July. Details again on the programme. We've got lots of exciting things coming up. I'm not going to tell you too much about them, but do keep in touch. Subscribe to our website. Have to put in these plugs. But lots coming up, including, obviously, Albert Herring for next year. And we intend to put on Albert Herring as Britten wrote it, with a 13-piece orchestra. And when he said 13 pieces, what he said was 12 pieces with percussion. Now, he didn't say percussion, one instrument, he just said percussion. So there's a big orchestra to consider. And you know what? Orchestras cost a lot of money, which leads me on to my commercial break. And you never go to an opera house or a concert these days without somebody standing up and saying, please give generously. Glyndebourne the other night, the chorus master did exactly that. He gave us a code for us all to text. And you know what? It didn't work. So they lost out from my £10 that I was going to subscribe. But we have our Q code, and I tested it this afternoon, and it does work. So if you feel like helping us towards our production of Albert Herring, we would be extremely grateful. But that's all I've got to say. Thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you here in just 3 weeks' time. Once again, thank you so much for our speakers.